Welcome to the Bitcoin Business Podcast. Today I am sitting down with Isaiah Douglas. He's a director and account executive over at Swan. Their mission is to orange pill the next 10 million people and make them fully grok Bitcoin, which is just a incredible goal and something that in one way or another we absolutely share at Sovereign. Our focus is on the education as well. That's what it's all about for Bitcoin. And so welcome to the show, Isaiah.
It's great to be here. And I think, yeah, one of the biggest things that we talk about at Swan, and I'm sure you guys would feel the same way, is, education leads to allocation, right? If we get people to ask questions, to think, and sometimes understand Bitcoin in a different way, it's like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Versus, maybe they come in with some preconceived notions, or they've really not spent the time and kind of borrow the expert opinion from whatever form or sector they're in and run with that. So it's a lot of conversation, a lot of education, and then it's cool to see that light bulb moment for people.
Absolutely. It is all about education because Bitcoin it's so new, and if you approach it with the same mental models that you've looked at the world previously, it's just not gonna jive with you. It's not gonna make any sense. So why don't we just start with that? What is the education initiatives that you are involved with at Swan? Maybe just give a little bit of introduction to what you're doing and what you're all about if somebody might not know you.
Sure. So yeah, my role at Swan is I'm a director. I'm on the Swan private team. So I will have conversations with both typically individuals, but sometimes there's families. There'll be folks that are interested in Bitcoin that are very far along the rabbit hole, or those that are very new. And so sometimes it is something where I'll talk about like meeting them where they're at and understanding where they're coming from. So for me, if you use the same analogies, stories, examples with folks across the spectrum of like different things they do or different parts of the country, perhaps, you're going to have a way to be a little bit more flexible. And so my background prior to joining Swan was as a financial advisor. I had co-owned a financial planning company with a business partner, and I talked about Bitcoin since call it the summer of 2020 is when I really came out and was much more vocal, talking like, hey, clients and on social media or other places, this is what I'm buying, and I'm not investing typically in traditional assets anymore. This is why, and then just letting them ask questions. And so it's been a process where, depending on who they are, what they do, and even different professions, like using examples from what they would understand, what impacts them. There's certain professions I know a little bit more about, and there's some that I'm like, I don't really know your world, so you got to use something more generic. But yeah, I think ultimately it's trying to understand and say, okay, these are the issues that someone faces, right? How does Bitcoin help? And I've had people that have told me, well, I met someone like very successful, great for them, right? They have no kids. They're like, why would I ever need Bitcoin? I can just buy the S&P and I'm in good
Mm,
shape. And trying to explain to them, why Bitcoin matters for, helping them live their best life. They're good. Like they're like, we travel more than ever. We're really wealthy and affluent. It's like, hey, that's great. I'm sure they have causes as well. And it's just more of an efficiency thing, and trying to explain to them how they can do more good for what they care about versus someone else. Maybe they're younger, maybe they're, someone that's trying to buy their first house, and just, giving examples of like, hey, housing priced in Bitcoin, housing priced in dollars. Here's a quick example, right? In whatever area, it's typically going to be something where if they save in dollars, it's going to always be that perpetual treadmill. They're trying to run, like, it's just getting more expensive versus in Bitcoin terms, it's dropping and allows it to be a little bit more obtainable. So you have to be flexible, I think, in the way that you approach explaining Bitcoin, and getting someone to be interested. There has to be some hook that gets them to say, ooh, this is worth paying attention to. And so from there, then you can build on that. But sometimes, you're going to swing and miss, and other times you're going to have something that makes sense. But I think a lot of it is just asking good questions on the front end and understanding, what are the areas or the things where they're going to kind of crack the door open for, ooh, that's a good point around Bitcoin, and how to explain it versus, you know, always having this like Austrian economic, like, anti-government approach that may resonate with a certain audience, but there's going to be a certain audience that's not going to resonate nearly as much with.
absolutely. Yeah, I think it's very wise to tailor your orange pill to the audience because for some reason Bitcoin is both the most obvious and simple thing in the world, but it is so hard for people to have that aha moment. It is really fascinating, honestly. I think it's something where Bitcoiners we have some sort of deep philosophical passion about orange pilling people and how to do it more effectively because it's so difficult. Um, What has been your, just a kind of question, thinking, what's been your ideal strategy? Is there something you figured out that's really helped you? Something, I know you just said it depends, but is there something that's really, like you found like this is really the strategy that I use?
I came at Bitcoin not from a technical perspective, but more from like the monetary side of
Mhm.
things, just with my background. So if I encounter someone that does come from the technical side, I'm probably not going to be as effective as maybe some of my peers at Swan or other places that are more technical. That's what someone wants. So I think you have to
Sure.
understand if that's where they want, like giving them good options to like deepen that knowledge or say, hey, that's a great question. I get it at a high level, but you might be asking questions that are going to be much above my pay grade per se, or just my knowledge
Yeah.
level there. But I think for the average individual or coming back to a business owner, it's very clear to say like life is getting more expensive. With Bitcoin, life gets easier, right? And so think about like McCormick and his big event that he does in Bedford called Cheat Code. It's similar. Like if you're able to save in this asset or use it for whatever purpose it is, whether it's to acquire a competitor, expand, just have excess in case things get hard. It's like it can be a cheat code, and it's like an easier way to explain that. And I think most people don't necessarily want to get into the weeds on the technical side of Bitcoin as much, but more of like what's the impact it can have for me. Because we don't think of money as like a technology typically. Like when someone's saving and
Mm.
they're storing money or they're investing, they don't really think of it as a technology thing. And so it's an asset that allows life to get easier. And I think that resonates with the vast majority of people. And then it can be like, well, tell me more, or I don't agree with that, or there's pushback, and then you kind of unpack that from there, depending on who they are and where they're at.
That's actually great. I love the framing of just Bitcoin is just technology that helps make your life easier, right? That just makes perfect sense to me. Instead of coming out the woodwork saying we're gonna separate money and state and all this kind of stuff, it just that's a much more neutral way of doing it. I'm kind of curious, what do you find, and perhaps you at Swan, are people and potentially if you're talking to business owners as well, do you think they're mostly motivated by a fear of getting debased and like it's a savings tool, like it helps protect them against debasement and inflation? Or are they motivated by the ambition of the potential gains? Because it's really two sides of the same coin, right? You're protecting your wealth and you're growing your wealth. So what is the most attractive to people in your experience?
I think to say that they aren't attracted to the gains would be a lie. I think that's where most people start. I think that's what attracts them. But going back to the idea of it just being efficient, they're going to say, okay, here are my alternatives. I can own this, all these different assets, right? Which
Yep.
one either protects and grows, right? What gives me the greatest odds of success? And I think walking them through, okay, if it's not Bitcoin, it's going to be bonds, it's going to be stocks, it's going to be gold, it's going to be commodities, it's going to be whatever. And just say if you were going to start from scratch, which ones would you want to have? And then okay, what are the limitations of each of these? I don't think it's as much of the debasement piece. I think there are people that get that. Typically, I think this is an asset that's gone up a lot. I can take a portion of it. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. And I think that helps frame it in a way where, especially as like a business owner, can be okay, you're holding how much in reserves? You typically have a cash buffer. What if you take a portion of that cash buffer and you hold it in Bitcoin? Now, what does that
Mhm.
do? It absolutely like insulates those like rising costs. Oh, that's helpful. How? Well, now you can maybe pay your people more, or you can expand, or you can do these things that you wanted to do if your profit margins were a little bit higher, or if you didn't have your cost of goods so high. And there's going to be nuance with a lot of different businesses, and I think right now with all the upheaval with tariffs and all this other stuff, depending on where that business is and what's going on, it's probably I think a little harder for someone to want to embrace Bitcoin because they're just like, hey, everything's spinning, and I got to figure out
You're right.
where everything lands. I do think the way that Bitcoin has interacted in this environment has been interesting and probably worth noting for a lot of
Hmm.
businesses, maybe more of those bigger like national like international businesses, right? But even the small business, the ones in each of our communities are still going to look at that and say, okay, I can acquire for a restaurant, like I can acquire my food, I can attract a new audience. I think there's a marketing angle as well with
Yes.
Bitcoiners because they are super loyal, right? Like Ben Justman from Peony Lanes has talked about that, right? He was like, hey, I'm this Bitcoin wine guy, and that's what he's become. And he sells, and he's been able to increase prices, selling to an audience, and they get why he's been so successful. And I think that's an interesting model, and it doesn't work for everyone. Uh, because there's going to be certain times where like there's not a lot of Bitcoiners in your area and your like product doesn't ship, right? But there's going to be more folks that will embrace Bitcoin over time. I would just say initially it's probably gains, but I think as someone understands Bitcoin more, they understand it far more than just it goes up in value a lot. It can be there's all these second and third order effects that can actually benefit the business, or them as a
Mm,
from a household perspective if you want to think about it more from that standpoint.
that's a great answer. This is something that I'm thinking about a lot. We're always talking about this at Sovereign. How do we reach people, and what is the messaging to kind of breach through the noise? If you were to, let's say you sat down with a business owner and they're like, "Well, I've seen Bitcoin here and there. I don't really get it. Why should I ever want to put this on my balance sheet?" What would you, going back to the other question, what would you lead with, the preservation narrative or the growth narrative? And in general, how would you propose the business case for Bitcoin?
Well, I would just ask them how much of their costs risen in the past, call it since 2020. I think there was a pre 2020 and a post 2020, and just ask them
Yeah.
how has business been since, and then shut up and let them talk. And then they're probably going to give me like three or four or five different things that I could then, attach and walk them through why Bitcoin matters. So the first one would maybe be, hey, it's really hard to attract people to stay, or I have to have these
Mm,
raises that are really expensive. Okay, well, like, have you been able to increase prices to offset that? And the answer is probably no. Some businesses, sure, like maybe they have. Same with their material costs have probably gone up. Maybe their rent has gone up. There's all these different things, and I would just ask them: have they been able to increase their sales? And just increase sales, but also like their profitability alongside that. And the answer for most businesses, I would imagine, is probably no. Right? Maybe you're selling more, but you have so much more cost, like you're netting a lot less. And so then it could be, okay, well, what if you take some of the proceeds of those sales and you carve out a portion of it and it sits in Bitcoin? And if we, look at Bitcoin historically, it's gone up X amount and it's a big number. But let's just use something way more conservative. And you can show them just by holding cash and Bitcoin together, majority of it in cash, they can have something that would increase likely right alongside all those other costs. I think Preston Pish on one of his interviews a while back, and it's been interesting. It's like if you look at a 4-year period, it was like 95% cash, 5% Bitcoin has basically given you the same performance of, call it the market or the S&P 500 over
mm,
time. And again, it's a 4-year window, which some business owners maybe won't want to hold it that long. But if they think about long-term savings where they don't have something they need to spend on right away, and it's just this is rainy day funds, like things hit the fan, we gotta fix or sort. It's liquid, it's easily accessible, and that would be the way that I would frame it: is just start with something small, carve out a portion of profits, put it into Bitcoin, and allow that just to sit. And you still have 95% in cash. You could always grab it really easy, and just
yep.
allow this to grow. And I can give you an example. Previously, I talked about being a financial advisor. I had a focus in veterinary medicine. And so there's a veterinarian that had bought some Bitcoin. That was a client. He had grown, he'd expanded, he'd built a new hospital. And then he had, I think, 3 of his doctors all go out on maternity leave at the same time. And so it was like, okay, he has
Wow.
more of an expense with finding associate veterinarians, people that he would have to pay a little higher, rate to come in that are not his employees, but are folks that basically will travel around and do different things. And so for him, he's like,
Hmm.
I don't want to sell Bitcoin, but I need it right now because I'm burning through cash instead of being as profitable as I was, just with expenses being higher and some of these different things. I was like, well, that's what it's there for, right? Like holding Bitcoin is great, it's helpful, but it is there as an asset for your business. And he's like knows that there's a window of time that he needed it, so he was able to liquidate that or liquidate a portion of it and then help get through a period of time where it helped the business be able to weather one of those kind of rocky points. And so like that's a real easy, I think, approachable one that each business is going to be slightly different. But for him, there's like a season where I need this for 6 months because of XYZ reasons with folks being out. So
That was
that's his
brilliant.
one.
Yeah, listen, I absolutely love that. And I want to touch on the seasonality that you just came into there because mean, first of all, the main argument against putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet seems to always be volatility. Well, yes, it's great, it has these gains, but my business needs to be stable. I'm not looking for a business with a 60 vol, right? That can obviously be completely negated by just having a smaller allocation that you're comfortable with. It's very basic, but I think a lot of people have not even considered that fact that you can literally put a 5-10% allocation in Bitcoin, and just like the Nakamoto portfolio, the open source tool from Swan, you can play around with all these things. Any kind of portfolio that you plug Bitcoin into, it just improves not just the returns, but the risk adjusted returns. Now, my point was, for businesses that have a lot of seasonality and a lot of uncertainty, it can be larger cycles within their industry or just the seasons of the year. If they're entirely reliant on their P&L, on just sales, that's a very insecure position to be standing in, because that very seasonality implies that your sales are fluctuating and not steady due to very real circumstances. You need savings, you need a treasury, but until Bitcoin, what were you going to put in there? I mean, you could put treasury bills, you could have cash, but it's still, you're underperforming the hurdle rate and the cost of capital. With Bitcoin, now you're not just relying on your P&L, you have your balance sheet to actually grow the business and kind of smooth over perhaps some of those instability. Could you perhaps speak a little bit more to that? Because I think it's very fascinating and I don't hear a lot of people talking about it.
Yeah, I think the other thing that it introduces is, as a business owner really understands Bitcoin, it's going to then challenge, like, okay, what is the reinvestment back into my business? If this is something that I have X that I make, I have expenses, I have my sales, whatever, and I net this, pay all my bills, and I have this left over. And if it can just compound and grow, at, call it a 35 to 60% compound annual growth rate, what are they going to deploy that into their business to do that is going to outperform that? And the question is probably not a lot. There are some businesses that can, and I think that makes a ton of sense. But it starts to then introduce that question. And I know some people will say, well, now you're incentivizing businesses not to grow and not reinvest, and this is a net negative. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it is more of business owners feeling comfortable being like, we don't have to go grow just to grow, right? Like, GDP needs to go up because GDP just has to go up, even if we don't do things that are actually productive for like society. And it's this similar mindset where you can almost be like a batter in a baseball game. You can wait for the right pitch instead of trying to swing at so many things that come in. Just wait for the right pitch. Sit on a fastball. Wait for whatever pitch. Then when you take a swing, now you can actually really deploy it. So maybe for a specific business, they have seasonality. You go through a period, you're stacking Bitcoin, you're being patient. You see, your friendly competitors out in the marketplace. Maybe they want to grow. They're going to, cut this, they're going to do that, they're going to do these things. Well, okay, maybe there's a season, right? It's a little bit of a instead of the rainy season, right? It's the dry season, and it's like, okay, we didn't have as good of a year. And let's say it's more tourism based. It's, hey, in the summers, it's
Mm,
super busy. We do guided tours for XYZ,
yep.
and then all of a sudden, those other places, they just can't survive, right? This one year, weather was bad, economy's a little softer. They just overextended themselves. You're in a good spot. Coming back that following year, either it's maybe you make an acquisition, maybe you needed a boat, you're going out and doing tour, whatever it is, right? Maybe you either can acquire them at a really good discount because they just really can't stay open. They just closed their doors. And so now you can bring in the folks that were doing work over there. Having Bitcoin to then be able to tap into it, because Bitcoin is going to likely be a little different as far as its performance versus your business or the seasonality that's there. It's just going to be something that is, call it a diversification tool. Not always, right? But I'll hear a lot of times, oh, Bitcoin's just a highly correlated, tech stock, or it's just correlated to the markets. And there can be elements for folks that are really interested into markets where, correlations go to one in like these crisis moments, right? A lot of things go down at the same time. Go back to 2020, go into March, a lot of things sell off at the same time. Historically, though, like Bitcoin does not correlate with tech stocks. It does not correlate with the S&P. It kind of marches to its own beat. yes, global liquidity matters. And so if the faucet's on and money is easier to get, Bitcoin is going to be a really, really strong performer. And Lynn Alden and Sam Callahan wrote a really good piece on that, just talking about how Bitcoin is like this sponge that'll soak up liquidity and address it faster. If there is a period where all of a sudden liquidity is higher, that might be inflationary. Bitcoin is going to then again preserve your business to where those costs. If I'm a business owner that does not own Bitcoin, all of a sudden those costs rise. I have to then raise my prices. I have to do these other things just to stay flat. Whereas someone that has Bitcoin, they might be able to withstand that a little bit longer, make adjustments, and actually be, again, at a kind of an unfair advantage in the marketplace to be able to grow their clientele, their customer base, these other things. And so sometimes I would just go back to Bitcoin can allow you to be patient instead of having to feel rushed and so much pressure to do something. Sometimes the best decision could be run your business the way you're doing it, make small tweaks here and there, but you don't need to go out and grow or acquire or do these things that you feel like you had to do before, where it was like this get big or get out. Right. And I think that's how a
Yes.
lot of businesses have felt for a long time. It's either you got to get big or get out, where Bitcoin all of a sudden reintroduces you can be a really great small business, do awesome work, and you don't have to scale to be massive. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing.
That was very beautifully said. Absolutely love that. I want to touch on this very specific thing you're talking about with I in the fiat system where we're living now, we have completely perverse incentives, and it's really been reversed, in my opinion, that now we're thinking, well, the total aggregate spending in the economy determines the health of the economy. Like somehow by us spending money, that creates value for us. I completely disagree with that notion, and that's on the consumer side. If you look at the producer side, it's the same mentality. We have to keep growing. We have to produce more stuff, sell more stuff, grow our P&L. Because you do have to, because if you're not growing with at least the same rate as the monetary expansion rate or faster, you're decaying, you're falling behind. So it gives this unfair and really immoral kind of like business owners standing on quicksand, and they have to always be looking for some edge and doing something new, taking on more risk. At the same time, they cannot even hold cash in their business because that cash is toxic, it's losing its value. So they're overextended, they're over leveraged, a lot of debt in a lot of modern businesses, and then at the same time, they have no buffer, they have no savings account, no meaningful savings account. Bitcoin is the ultimate unfair competitive advantage. I think I don't mince words. I think if you compare a company that's not on a Bitcoin standard to one that is, it's just night and day. I mean, the Bitcoin standard company, it's gonna outperform the other one by, at least in my opinion, as long as Bitcoin continues doing what it does, it's incomparable. And by standing on that sound foundation of Bitcoin, you're able to look further in the future, relax, and focus on what you're doing. And I don't think there's anything wrong with your more mind. It's the same people gold economy. They really thought about a world outside of a fiat system, right? That you can actually just do what you do as a business and then try to accumulate savings, and that's actually a good thing. I mean, it's not that revolutionary in my mind when I think about it. I think a business on a Bitcoin standard is just it's just the future. Just like a person on a Bitcoin standard is superior to investing in most other things. What would your argument be for somebody that's saying, okay, well, Daniel, I say that all sounds great, but Bitcoin is just too risky for me. I don't trust putting something that new and fanciful on my balance sheet. What would you say to that?
I think it's like saying I'm an aggressive investor, Daniel. If you're like, hey, I'm a really aggressive investor, I go back to my financial advisor days. I'm like, what does that mean? So like, what is risk? Like, let's define what is risk. Is risk the fact that you're wiped out in a couple months? Sure. The risk is also that you continue to operate your business and you cannot keep the doors open because you can't either grow, scale, access capital in the same way over time because you aren't able to, yeah, achieve like kind of escape velocity as a big company, or you
Mm,
just hang on enough where you're like able to get by. But a lot of people will make small business ownership super glamorous, and I think anyone that's listening that's ran a small business knows it's not always that way, and it's not always the way to maximize making money. Right? Sometimes working for someone else could make more money, but it's not what they're passionate about. And so what I would tell them about Bitcoin is Bitcoin has traded, right? So I'll use some stats for folks because sometimes that resonates. Bitcoin has traded more hours than the S&P 500, even though the S&P 500 started in the 1970s, right? Because it only trades during market hours and it's closed on the weekends where Bitcoin's 24/7, 365. Bitcoin is extremely liquid. I have people that will ask me like, if I wanted to get out X amount of money, like would it? It's like, no, you're not going to move the price. Like you can buy millions or sell millions of dollars. You're not moving the price. I promise you, you're not that influential in Bitcoin. Like if they understand
yeah.
how the depth of liquidity in the space, like it is very, very, very liquid, and obviously can access it at any point in the day or weekend or any of that stuff. And so what I would say is I think the real risk is owning zero, right? From an allocation perspective, the only wrong allocation to Bitcoin is zero. That's the only one that I feel comfortable saying. I had to hang up my hat as the financial advisor to tell someone like what the right allocation is. And so that's one that they need to sit down with and understand. But it can be going back to understand that you can scale up or down based on what you feel like volatility. Like what's the point where you're gonna like be sweating it out? Like, oh my gosh, if Bitcoin goes down 60%, I couldn't handle that. That's normal for most businesses. I get that. I agree. So you can't be 100% Bitcoin. So we got that. So zero's wrong, 100% is wrong. Let's find somewhere in the middle. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I think that's where most people will end up at. And you can start small, right? Take ongoing incoming revenue and carve out a portion. But if you run the numbers, and for any business owner that likes, math at all, or maybe they need to talk to someone like yourself, or if they have a CPA that gets Bitcoin, because a lot of CPAs will be like, yeah, that's too much trouble. Like it's gonna be extra. They don't want to learn, and so they'll tell them like, don't do the Bitcoin thing. That is changing. There's some really great CPAs out there. Some that I'm sure you'll have on the show at some point that can help people understand the space better, because it's not that confusing to use Bitcoin as an asset. But yeah, to say it's too new, I think it's a hard thing to say after it's been around for going on 16 years. It's the best performing asset, 11 out of the last 14. So if I start again using statistics, I'm like, well, shoot, okay, it's been the worst performer 3 years, but 11 years has been the best. So okay, I'm going to go through these periods where yes, I'm going to have a portion of an allocation, but you're basically dollar cost averaging into this asset over time because your business should be profitable. If your business is not profitable and you have expenses that are greater than anything that you're bringing in the door, yeah, maybe you need to fix that first before moving to Bitcoin. But let's say you have a business that is able to generate revenue, it's positively cash flowing, you have something that people are saying, yes, we want this, it resonates. You need to then be acquiring Bitcoin, even if it's a small amount, continually over time, because it does give you freedom and flexibility to then make decisions in the future. Whether it is, hey, I can convert this back to dollars, I can pay out to my employees, I can grow, I can maybe buy my building if lease rates are too high, or all these different things just to help someone make the business easier to achieve. But to say that it's too new or it's too volatile, I think those things are starting to become less and less. I mean, when you see the United States government talking about a Bitcoin strategic reserve, it's like, okay, your mom and pop business that you run should also be talking about this or thinking about it. I get maybe when I started talking about Bitcoin in 2020, that would be the response, but there's been too many
Mm.
case studies, examples, businesses that have adopted Bitcoin that it's been successful. And it goes back to like the proof's in the pudding. Like at some point you have to believe what's in front of your eyes. And that's great that you feel a certain way, but Bitcoin has had success. It is continuing to attract and grow and expand the network. And the idea that Bitcoin is just better money, one of the things I like to say is, it is the one good that every living, breathing human today wants, which is money. And every living, breathing human in the future will want money. So if it's an upgrade, like that's one of the most important things, right? It's like we have electricity now. It's like we have the internet now. Like that is a huge move for your business. Like how did you embrace those things? especially if it's an older business owner. Hey, how did you embrace the internet? Oh, wow, the fact that we're using Zoom for our business now to sell versus, we used to take out ads and put it in the yellow pages, right? Those kind of advances in technology do benefit businesses. And so Bitcoin is one of those advances that can help your business. It's just saying how you save and store the value that you create gives you the freedom and flexibility and optionality in the future. And I think even for someone that wants to sell their business, let's say they're like, oh, I can't wait for private equity to call me and write me a huge check. In the future, like having that Bitcoin there, they're probably not going to buy those savings. Maybe they are. Maybe that'll make you more attractive as an acquisition target, and it can make your multiple higher. But those are all things to consider and think about. And again, in the public markets, this leverage Bitcoin equity strategy for MicroStrategy, for GameStop, for Similar, for MetaPlanet, for all these different companies of just taking on cheaper debt and buying a better asset, the market seems to reward those. And so again, I think it's worth business owners paying attention. Not that you have access to the same capital markets as a small business owner, but if the markets are telling you that's attractive in the public markets, you probably would want to bring some of those concepts and ideas downstream. And I think you can with Bitcoin.
Brilliant. I loved your analogy there. I like to say that Bitcoin will continue to appreciate in price until human desires are reversed. I think at that point in time when we want the opposite of what we've always wanted, then Bitcoin will go to zero. Until that day, I'm pretty confident.
Yeah, and
Because who,
people
who doesn't want better money?
yeah, and people act like, well, if you have Bitcoin, you're never going to spend it. And I'm like, I don't agree with that at all. I still think I will want to go on vacation. I still think I will want to, go out to eat with my family. And if I hold Bitcoin as my monetary, maybe I'm not going to go out to eat at some place that's not very good. Maybe I'm going to value those decisions, but like that is normal. Like you should still want to do things. I think human nature is still that we want to consume. It's just you give the ability for it not to just have the cobwebs and the mothballs and just deteriorate and you lose value, right? Like you can't hold dollars long term, and everyone gets that. And I think as business owners, they understand I can't hold dollars. So today it is pay down debt or expand or just pull that money out and they use it on the personal side to invest or something. And now they have another option of just saving. They haven't really had that option easily accessible to them before. And I think now it's like, yeah, you can just go have profitability and save and then wait. Again, I'll use the baseball analogy, wait for the right opportunity when the market presents itself with a really good thing. And if you are there and you have access to capital and everyone else doesn't, like that's when you can acquire a competitor, you can acquire a building, you can acquire, equipment when it's really, really on sale when people are struggling because you had the foresight to just stock things away. And if your savings is actually then now growing at a high clip versus you're just holding cash, it's kind of losing power and you're hoping. It's like this is not a losing strategy. Even if there never comes a day that's really attractive to acquire all these things, you're still growing your savings that you can either pull out as profit to you as the business owner, or you can redeploy it in your business at any point. I think that is kind of unique where it gives you, again, a bunch of flexibility for strategic planning purposes for what is ahead from a growth perspective.
Absolutely. Let's make savings sexy again. It's gotten such a bad rep. I mean, what save your money should be something that people aspire to. I think that's yes. I
And
think
it's
there's a no, please go ahead.
I was gonna say, and I think it's hard for especially someone early on to be like, "Hey, Daniel, I hear you say saving, saving, savings. Bitcoin is investing. It's super speculative. It's a gamble for me. I'm not there yet." And I would say that's fair. That's fair. Early on, I definitely looked at Bitcoin early on as an investing thing, and I try to be very, careful with my words. And I would agree with you. It is savings. I will take from Bitcoin and invest it when I see I want to, but I don't view Bitcoin as investing because it's not a company, right? There's not something that's there that I'm investing in. It is savings. It's money. And it is a change. Just like I don't think you really invest in gold. I think you save in gold. You don't invest in dollars, right? You can save in dollars. I think it's a losing strategy. I know it's a losing strategy, right? And that's a guarantee that we understand that. But it is, I do think sometimes as Bitcoiners say save in Bitcoin versus invest, someone's like, oh, I want to invest in Bitcoin. That's fair. Maybe you're early on the journey, you look at it as an investment. Okay. It is savings. And as you get more comfortable and going back to that education and allocation piece, the savings will come with that as they start to understand and have confidence in the rule set, what Bitcoin is, how it operates. It's not going to be as there's not a lot that's going to change, and that's a good thing for savings, right? You don't need it to be super exciting as far as all these things that are happening. It's like you want that to be fairly boring, but
Yes.
boring is very beautiful when it comes to savings.
I love that. Listen, Bitcoin is the perfect amount of boring and simple. We don't need Solana and Ethereum to be the cornerstone of the future's economy. It's I don't want to save in a Ruby Goldberg machine. Let's put it like that. Bitcoin is built for security, longevity, decentralization, and value, and that's what really matters. I'm sitting here thinking, you mentioned earlier the majority of business owners are older. I think they're probably above 50 years old. How do we reach these people? Because they're smart, they're successful, they have money, and like Michael Saylor often alludes to, Bitcoin it's on a need to know basis. It's for people that are at war. It's for people that have a need for it. And I'm worried that a lot of people in the older generation might be, well, I'm sort of coasting my way to retirement. I don't want to learn anything new. And this whole Bitcoin thing it sounds great, all of this stuff you're talking about, but man, I'm too old for this. How do we approach this? How do we tackle that?
I don't think anyone wants to be told they're old, right? And
I'm
so and
sorry.
so they no. I'm just saying though, like for a lot, some people will. They'll be like, "Hey, I'm getting older," but I think for a lot of people, they want to feel young, right? And there are,
Hmm.
and I will even just say from like the experience at Swan, the folks that are interested in Bitcoin is not just those that are young. There are definitely folks that are, I've talked to people in their late 60s, early 70s. I've had people that are older than that have had conversations about Bitcoin. They are interested, and there is an interest that is there. I think a lot of it is depending on kind of where they are at. There's going to be certain people that I don't need it. Life is good. I've crushed it. I've made all this money. And I think you can still have a fun intellectual conversation as to ask them why, right? Why did you have so much success? And some of that is going to be they made really good decisions. Some of it's going to be they were a product of an environment at a time that just worked really well, right? As we shifted so much of kind of the purchasing power from the individuals to these larger corporations, and we outsourced all this stuff. And if you were at the precipice of those big shifts, you saw a lot of wealth creation. A lot of people have stored and built their wealth in the United States based on lowering interest rates for 40 years, from the 70s into basically call it 2020. And that's shifted, right? Like all of a sudden real estate might be a little bit harder. It's just like you can't throw money and buy a building and do this burr strategy and refinance and pull this equity out and just keep doing it for decade after decade. And helping people understand like it's not a problem that you were successful. Like that's a great thing. The next opportunity for you to do that and or have and drive efficiency in this business, or take that next step, is Bitcoin. Like it is the natural next thing. Like the wealth creation vehicle that was there, which I think has historically been real estate, that shifted. I don't think the next generation of folks that are going to make extreme wealth for their business or their family, like leveraging this real estate strategy of this falling interest rate environment, is not going to be the same. And I think Bitcoin is the opportunity, and trying to articulate that and explain and get into detail with some folks would be helpful. And then if someone's pretty anti-technology, I think sometimes instead of trying to convince them so hard that they need this thing, it could be like, hey, that's fine. Maybe it's not right for you. That's okay. And they're gonna then be like, well, why won't they? If Daniel wants me to buy Bitcoin, why is he not really pushing me to do this? And I think that they need to want it as well. But if they see their peers, and typically high performers are going to be competitive as all get out. And so it's a competitive advantage. And if you can just frame it as, if you want to outcompete your friendly competitors, or maybe your unfriendly competitors that you really don't like, and you want to acquire them, Bitcoin is the way to do that, because you're not going to see the kind of growth that you can go and do that. And again, I think for a number of people, it is just they've not sat down and had enough conversation, because they've done really, really well, and they're busy, they have families, they have grandkids now, they have all these different things, but they want to still be in the game, right? A lot of these older business owners, they still want to be involved. They still want to do things, but they're thinking about, how do we transition either to the next gen, or how do I transition this business into, the future? And I think Bitcoin could be a part of that, not only to attract talent and continue to grow, but also then as a, strategic tool to do so many different things that they may just need to have that little carrot dangled in front of them. And then, as we know, once you get a little taste of Bitcoin, they will then take the journey of education from there. They just need the introduction. And so sometimes they just need the why, and the why can be, again, as kind of coming full circle back to our beginning of the conversation, it's not going to be the same for the person that runs the big construction company in town versus the person that is maybe the creative, right? There's going to be different. A blue collar person and then the creative business owner are going to be two different ways to position it. And you and I might be better positioned for one versus the other, and that's why I think it takes all kinds of kinds, and why there's various different voices in Bitcoin and content areas that people will gather to and grasp onto.
Absolutely brilliant. Very very grounded advice. And I certainly hope that I don't rub people the wrong way as a guy in his late 20s sitting here railing on old people. That's definitely not my intention. I have a lot of respect for these people, and our firm, our whole mission is to reach business owners, educate them on Bitcoin. It's what I think about day and night. And so I want to reach these people. I want to help them understand. And I loved your answer. It's brilliant. I feel I understand the aversion to change. I'm coming on 28 next month, and I'm looking at new things. I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to deal with that. I'm starting to feel, so I cannot imagine somebody in their 50s or 60s suddenly having to re-educate themselves on what is digital capital. It's extremely hard to understand, and when you didn't grow up natively on the internet like I did, it's a huge challenge. So I have a lot of respect for people that have done it. I have an interesting question which I'd love to hear your thoughts on because it's kind of controversial. It's a little bit some people have very extreme opinions on it. You mentioned public companies like Semler, Metaplanet, and Strategy doing Bitcoin strategies to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. It's what I like to call the treasury arbitrage strategy. You're arbitraging between a weak currency and a better currency, even though it's money, better form of money. This is working out extremely well. These companies are the highest performing companies in the world, but they are public companies. Is there a place for replicating that playbook in smaller private companies? Because it obviously entails taking on leverage, taking on debt, intelligent debt. You can just buy Bitcoin with your revenue or with your profit or whatever, but let's say you're able to go out as a small business owner and get a loan for 8% interest for 100 grand. Should you use some of that to buy Bitcoin? Is that irresponsible? People have very different opinions on this. I would absolutely love to get your take on it.
I personally, like, if I'm running a business, and again, it's going to be dependent on the executive structure, and if you have people on board that understand Bitcoin, and it's going to be also dependent on the nature of your business, as we talked about. Like, I think there's some uncertainty at the moment. You want to have some reserves, but if I can go borrow, and again, what's the structure of the note? But I would say if I can go take on debt of something that I view as being very unvaluable, and be able to go and acquire Bitcoin, I think it makes sense. So I am pro that idea. I am pro that strategy. Leverage is a dirty word in Bitcoin a lot of times, I think, just because of Bitcoin backed lending and the Celsiuses of the world and BlockFi's. But if you're taking on debt, and maybe you're just even taking on, maybe you own a building and you have it and it's paid off now, and you're an older business owner, and you can then refi and pull out equity in that building. How much annual is that building growing? It's definitely not growing at the same rate or clip that Bitcoin is. Yeah, rates are a little higher, but if I can go 7 or 8%, do I think Bitcoin outperforms 7 or 8%? I think yes. And so depending on the repayment schedule, is it interest only? All these variables. That to be said, I think it can make sense where you can go acquire the Bitcoin, hold it, let that note run to maturity, sell the Bitcoin that you had to pay off that 100 grand that maybe now is 130 or 150 or whatever, however long that is. Will Bitcoin have done well in that period? Odds are, if you give yourself 4 to 5 years, my answer is yes. And I did a thread on the idea of dips and Bitcoin being down different times. It's like, if you're able to acquire Bitcoin strategically when Bitcoin's off its highs, like as we're recording this, Bitcoin is probably down still 20, 22%, 25%, depending on the day and the fluctuations from its all-time high. That's usually a really good time to acquire Bitcoin. Doing this strategy when, Bitcoin has just run up, 45% in a quarter. Yeah, could it be a little rockier? Are you going to maybe convert it right at the wrong time? Perhaps, but what's your length of that term? And if you're giving yourself enough time and you're not trying to just like squeeze out like, well, if this works over 6 months, if it doesn't, I've jeopardized everything I've worked for. I think that's a really dumb idea.
Hmm.
But if you can say, we can pay this note with cash flow, we can comfortably do it. And it's not something, yeah, maybe you're gonna have to stretch a little bit, but it is not putting everything at risk to borrow and then own Bitcoin and then repay that and run out the numbers and do it at different return structures. If you can net Bitcoin and have the ability to take on leverage, we live in a credit based economy. Go take advantage of that and don't necessarily say, hey, those are fiat games or these other things. I hear you. I think the business can be slightly different than a personal perspective, especially with the construction of the business. Yeah, you can blow yourself up personally and never recover from that. From a business perspective, again, it's going to be within the entity. You have a little bit of personal protection. Again, there's going to be a lot of nuance there, but I like the strategy, and that's enough like qualification. But I think it can make sense. I do think Bitcoin outperforms 8 to 12%. And so I would say if I can take out fixed rate debt, especially for an extended period of time, I'm a fan.
That was a brilliant answer. Perfect. No, I think we're actually in complete agreement on that. I think sometimes as Bitcoiners we let the way we look at leverage as soon as somebody brings up leverage, you think, well, they're trading some shitcoin or they're trying to leverage their Bitcoin in a personal capacity. But you have to think about if you're an intelligent business owner and an operator and you're engineering your capital stack and doing this in an intelligent way, this is completely different. You can pay the loan with your operating cash. You can use it as collateral even later, but I would refrain from using Bitcoin too much as collateral at this point in time. But there are so many things you can do if you're smart about it. So I think just saying completely no, avoid leverage, avoid debt, it's a bit premature because you said this early in the conversation. It's not going to be a whole lot of product lines and services that are going to deliver the kind of returns that Bitcoin does. And I think that's very healthy because the world doesn't need more stuff. It needs more quality stuff. So, can we slash 30% of all the garbage that's out there? Sorry, all the Chinese plastic garbage, and then put that in Bitcoin instead and take our mental energy into building something worthwhile. I think that's a beautiful idea. I say I know you have to leave here, so I'm going to be respectful of your time, but this was such a great conversation. Thank you for coming on, and you I can definitely tell you're a battle-hardened Bitcoiner and you talk about this all the time because you were just on point. This was a great conversation and I think our listeners will get a lot out of it. So thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun. And I think the small business Bitcoin ownership is one of those areas that gets me really excited to talk about. And there's so many great small businesses that can, interact in their community, do some great things that this next, call it 5 to 10 years, we're going to see the proliferation of that. And I hope more business owners will be Bitcoiners, but more Bitcoiners will become business owners because that's what ultimately we want. Again, quality stuff, thinking about the community, doing good things. Those are things that I'm super passionate about. So if it helps, it was really, really fun to chat today. Thank you.
Your passion shines through and it was just such a pleasure, Isaiah. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You as well.